Hey there, Afshan. So let's take a look at your latest set of essays, domestic, international travel, benefits and drawbacks. Let's see what you wrote here. Experts throughout the world believe that nowadays domestic and international travel has increased exponentially. This essay will discuss the perceived benefits of this trend, which include, check it out, it's include because it's benefits. That's your subject. We'll discuss the benefits, which include. Okay? You ignore this prepositional phrase here. So this essay will discuss the perceived benefits of this trend, which include enhanced knowledge about other cultures and growth in the economy, as well as the associated drawbacks, such as financial problems and decreased cultural diversity. I strongly believe that the former assertion outweighs the latter. Okay. I think you use some really lovely vocabulary here. Enhanced knowledge, associated drawbacks, perceived benefits. All that is really nice. You've got some good collocations there and they're strong. The only thing that I don't entirely agree with here is this sentence right here where you say, I strongly believe, etc., etc. The reason why I don't entirely agree with that is because the essay doesn't ask you for it. This is one of those interesting ones where it just asks you, discuss the advantages and disadvantages. It doesn't say, discuss the advantages and disadvantages and give your opinion. In those essays, you do have to tell us what your position is. You do have to tell us what you think is stronger. In this one, they only want a balanced argument. And so you need to show us, beginning with your introduction, that you're just going to provide a balanced argument. Okay? So really good vocabulary, really good grammar, just that one tiny little mistake here. Other than that, it's great. Okay, so moving on to the next paragraph. On the one hand, there are several advantages of adventurous international and domestic trips. So what I would have done here is I would have left out the word adventurous, because if you're talking about adventure travel, you're really limiting this, and the essay did not ask you to do that. So it's better to be more general and leave it out and instead say, on the one hand, there are several advantages of international and domestic trips. All right, moving on. Traveling helps individuals learn about the cultures and traditions followed by different countries. This not only involves Indians visiting Italy to taste their Italian cuisine, singular, such as pizza, pasta, and noodles, as well as Americans realizing the ethnicity of Indian dresses like sari, lehenga, and turban. All right, so here there's some awkwardness. So I want to fix that. So, okay, it should have been something else like this. This not only involves Indians visiting Italy to taste their Italian cuisine, such as pizza, pasta, and noodles, but also Americans understanding, not realizing, understanding and this is also the wrong word. That doesn't make sense to understand or to realize the ethnicity of an Indian dress. So it's like, I understand what you're trying to say. At least I think I understand what you're trying to say. I do want to change it around. So let me try it one more time. This not only involves Indians visiting Italy to taste their Italian cuisine, such as pizza, pasta, and noodles, but also Americans learning about or discovering the culture behind Indian Indian dress. If you say Indian dress, it means basically the clothes of Indians. So Indian dress like sari, lehenga, and turban. Okay, I think it sounds better. Additionally, traveling to cities of one's own nation often results in the economic growth, not in the economic growth, but economic growth in general. When you say the economic growth, you're making it specific, and then you also should make it clear which economic growth you're talking about. So you could say the economic growth of New Delhi. That would make sense. But if you don't explain which one you mean and it's not clear from anything before that, then it's best to leave the out. So often results in economic growth. If, for example, people residing in Atlantic Canada had not embarked upon traveling to Toronto after the pandemic, this town would have suffered huge economic downturn, which would have led, get rid of that A, because now you're talking about the metal, which would have led to to the shutting down of restaurants. Because look, here you're shutting down, but you're specifying which particular shutting down you're talking about. It's shutting down of restaurants. So it should be the shutting down of restaurants so that we don't confuse it with shutting down of something else. So, which would have led to the shutting down of restaurants and hotels due to the lack of business. Therefore, I believe that traveling abroad and domestically not only creates awareness about the lifestyle of other nations, but also improves the business, which would result in economic prosperity of a country. Fine. Good. Lovely. So a few grammatical mistakes, but on the whole, I thought you did a really, really great job here. So let's move on to the next paragraph. On the other hand, there are a few disadvantages of frequent traveling. Firstly, this might result in financial strain. This is because it involves paying substantial money for expensive flights, it's not one flight, flights, hotel booking, and hiring a cab. For instance, two-way international, careful, you're missing an article. A two-way international trip to the United Kingdom could cost $10,000 per person, which is more than the monthly income of an average employee in Canada. Secondly, frequent traveling could result in the intermixing of different cultures, which might bring uniformity amongst the whole world. To illustrate, Indians would no longer be interested, would no longer be interested in traveling to America. If they get an opportunity to enjoy American dishes and see people dressed in Western clothes in their own country. Thus, traveling often results in money problems which might lead to stress and decline in the interest. This is awkward. We don't see in the interest to travel, which might lead to stress and decline you can't really say that. Let me think about this. Which might lead to stress and a decline in the interest to do something. I have to think about this for a second. I'm having a little hard time with this. Basically, I think you need to reword it a little bit. So I looked at it a couple of times, and I think the best thing to do is something like this. Thus, traveling often results in money problems, which might lead to stress and reduced desire to travel due to the lack of cultural variation. All right, so that's how I would do that. Okay. I think it's fine. I think, yeah, it's fine. You probably know by this point that IELTS is not an idea exam. They're testing your English and nothing else. That said, though, I do want to give you maybe a couple of ideas about how you could have developed this differently. And the reason why that's important, I'll explain to you right now. You want to make sure that the examiner understands that these are your ideas and you're expressing them very well and so forth, and that you're not kind of limiting yourself in terms of the ideas because of any sort of language limitation. I don't know if that makes sense, but oops, I don't know what that is. Sorry. All right. So when we're talking about the negatives of travel, I want to give you a couple of ideas about what we mean are the negatives of travel. So you talked about how expensive it is, and you talked about this thing about cultural variation. I think there are a couple of other things that you could have also considered. So you could have considered, for example, the fact that environmentally travel is considered very damaging. Fossil fuels are used to power jet planes. They're used to power trains and boats and cars. So this is really a damaging element to our environment. Okay, so that's one thing. Another thing that I want you to consider is that perhaps the places themselves are damaged from over tourism. So take, for example, I don't know, maybe someplace like Venice, which has been so overrun by tourists that they're now capping the number of tourists allowed to go there at any day. Sometimes what happens to a lot of places is that um, so many tourists go there, and there are so many businesses that cater to tourists that the place stops being the reason why people actually went there. So if you go someplace for natural beauty, and then instead of natural beauty, you see a lot of tourist shops and like tourist oriented restaurants and so forth, then it's no longer what you went there to see. Does that make sense? So these are some things that you can consider to be negatives of tourism. Of course, they're not the only ones, but I do want you to think about maybe something a little more general rather than just that tourism is expensive. Because that's not really why it's a negative necessarily. I'm just trying to get you to think about some other things as well. And I have to tell you the truth, I didn't really understand this. You said that there was uniformity. So it's almost like you're saying that travel brings about globalization and that's bad. Maybe that's what you think. Okay, fair enough. But like I said, I did want you to think about a couple of other things as well. All right, let's move on. I want to look at your conclusion and then finish this. To conclude, although frequent traveling causes financial stress and lack of interest in visiting other countries, I strongly believe that such a trend has more advantages, which includes, okay, good, gaining information about other cultures and growth of the local businesses. Fine. I still don't understand this. So if I travel more, I have a less of a desire to travel. It's kind of strange. It doesn't really make sense. So this is why I kind of want to give you some other suggestions as to what kinds of things you could say here. Overall, I thought you did a nice job. I did feel like the second body paragraph was a little weaker, that maybe you had trouble kind of coming up with some disadvantages of travel. And I got to be honest with you, this is rather common, so don't feel kind of disheartened by this. A lot of people have this trouble with this particular paragraph. But I hope that I give you some other ideas as to how to think about things, even if you don't take my ideas, which you certainly don't need to, just to give you some ideas about how you can think about this issue a little differently. All in all, good, nice job. So let's move on. We've got the movie preferences here. Okay, so the bar graph represents a different genre of movies, namely action, animation, comedy, drama, horror, and romantic, comma here, that are preferred by males and females across the world. Fine. Male members of the world prefer to watch comedy films, a comma after films, accounting for 145, followed by action and animation at 135 and 63, respectively. You're missing the word the here. The number of men who watched animation movies were double, you don't need two here, were double those who liked action films. Action. Okay. The preference of both genders in relation to comedy and action films were almost similar with a slight difference, whereas the number of males who watched action films were significantly higher than females by 45. Okay, so when I first began this paragraph, I assumed you were going to talk about men, and then I assumed the second one was going to talk about women. You started off well, comedy films, good, then action, and then animation. Also, fine, but I didn't really like this. I thought this was a little strange. So you went number one, number two, and then number three. And then this felt really kind of coming out of nowhere. Like it wasn't really linked anywhere. And it needed to be better linked so that we understood that you were essentially explaining to us just how big this difference was. So I wanted you to signpost that a little better, a little more clearly. Let's see how you could have done it. Male members of the world prefer to watch comedy films, accounting for 145. Full stop. Following this are action and animation, at 137 and 63. Full stop. This, or rather, something else. Therefore, animation is over double the figure of, therefore, the figure for action is over double that of animation. And that would have been a really, really nice, using some advanced grammar there. I think it would have sounded great. Okay. Now, here, I didn't really like the fact that you suddenly introduced women, because it felt like you were just talking about men here, and then you brought in this issue of women. You probably should have left it out. At least at this point, you should have, okay? All right, let's see what you wrote after that. Females who opted to watch romantic films were almost higher than men who were interested in the same genre of movies. Drama films were preferred more by females. However, the number of males surpassed those of the opposite gender in terms of horror movies. Now, look what's happening here. We have no data. There are no figures here, no numbers. So while you gave us like maybe four figures in the previous one, we have no data whatsoever for women. And so we're really missing a huge piece of the puzzle here without any of that data. And that's going to cost you in terms of task achievement, because it's kind of difficult to visualize this graph. We don't know where the females are in terms of, numbers. So definitely work on that. Let's see your overview. Overall, the most popular movies amongst men were comedy, and the least popular were from the romantic category. Most of the females enjoyed romantic films as compared to animation movies, as these were their least favorite category. Okay, so I essentially think you could have done more with this. I think you should have organized it a little differently. So let's take a look at it for a minute. You may or may not know that I typically tell students that they should put their overview directly after their introduction. There are a ton of reasons why I say this. I'm not going to get into the reasons, but I would like to suggest to you to treat your overview as an overview and not as a conclusion. So put it right after your introduction, and then when you do that, maybe it'll make you think of the overview a little differently, that you essentially right there and then have to show the most obvious, the most interesting, the thing that sticks out the most. For me, the thing that sticks out the most is that comedy was the most popular for both genders. And then after that, preferences differed between the two. Okay. And I think that would have made a really good overview right there. Okay. And then as you did, I would have separated my paragraphs into male and female, but strictly male and female, because the male paragraph, you remember, you added something about female, and that just made it really rather confusing. I don't think that's such a good idea. If you're going to have a paragraph about males, then start with just males. In contrast, when you then talk about females after that, you may want to refer to something that you said about the males. But when you start off with that first paragraph, the first detailed paragraph, keep it just to that. So if I were going to do this, I would probably would have said that I told you already what I would have said about my overview. Then I would have probably said comedy was the most popular movie among males at 145. This was followed closely by action movies at 137. The least popular movie among males was the romantic genre at 31, which was nearly 1/5 the figure of comedy. The remaining genres, animation, drama, and horror, all scored between 63 and 73 units of preference. Okay? And then you're done. Get out of there and then move on to the women. Okay, so women also found comedy, or no, women also were recorded as having comedy their favorite type of movie, or I'd probably say a little better. That sounds a little awkward. So you could have said comedy was also the favorite genre among women at 137, which is slightly less than the figure of men. However, the second most popular movie was romantic, with approximately 20 units less. Okay. And then you can also again compare it to the men. You can say that this is uh, a dramatic difference compared to the male figure for the same genre. Okay. And then what else can you tell me about the women's data? Well, you can see here that, why don't we talk about the least popular? So then you could say the least popular movies among women were animation at only 54, while the remaining types all scored between 64 and 86. And then you're done. That's it. Okay, so what did I do? I started with my highest, I went to my lowest, and then I just kind of smushed everything else together. All right, so that should give you, some ideas about how to organize this. All right, so go ahead and correct these. Let me know if you found this feedback helpful. Let me know if you learned any kind of new ways to approach these tasks, and I'll be waiting for your next set. Okay, so good luck with that, and I can't wait to see them.